Attention Kmart shoppers, today I want to talk about Arcane Season 2. I'm very late to this party. I'm so late, in fact, that the venue has been completely renovated and a family of 4 has moved in. But is that going to stop me from getting litty in the city? I think not. I want to talk about Season 2 in a way that I haven't seen anyone else talk about it. The questions we typically ask when evaluating media are, does this make sense? Is this in character? Are the rules of the story world being adhered to? And a lot of these conversations have been orbiting the second season, conversations about the show's canon. Canon is what happens in the story world. The raw, objective information, the Wikipedia article. This happens and then this happens. This character wants X, so they do Y. No thought given to the audience, just the timeline, bland and functional. But execution is how the timeline is presented to the audience. What is revealed and when, where the camera goes, whose POV we see things from, red herrings, misdirections, flashbacks, artistry. This dichotomy of canon and execution is essential to understanding the different types of writing advice. My gargantuan storytelling guide, which cost me an arm, a leg, and a soul to make, is all about canon. I don't talk about what audiences like and what they don't like. I talk about how to write a story that makes sense, how to arrange elements and character motivations, not for the benefit of the audience, but for the coherence of the story itself. But there is a whole nother side to the storytelling conversation, and that's what this video is about. Taylor Sheridan is a name that might ring a bell. He wrote Sicario, he wrote Hell or High Water, some other stuff. He's a successful dude, so he's clearly doing something well. And he has this quote about how he goes for the simplest story ideas possible so that he can pad them out with flavor scenes. And when I heard this for the first time, I was like, that's lame. You should do smart plot stuff. Smart plot stuff is the way. But I've kind of come around to this way of thinking. I do love smart plot stuff, but I'm realizing that there's a formula to determine exactly how much smart plot stuff you should have versus how much flavor and artistry. The equation goes like this. The more complex your canon is, the more straightforward your execution must be. That's it. So let's unpack what this means. I've talked about HBO's True Detective a few times on this channel. True Detective, the first season, that is, has a fairly simple plot. It has 2 main characters, and they're usually together, and each episode has a few key beats. Yeah, sometimes Rust and Marty will talk to a guy who leads them to a guy who leads them to a guy, but those interactions are not essential bullet points. They're flavor scenes, they're padding. And I say that with immense respect. Those townspeople scenes are saturated with culture and meaning, they're immersive, they're funny, they contribute new perspectives, they are what make the show memorable. But if you just look at the skeleton of True Detective, it is a very simple show. A few things happen per episode, and the rest is artful meandering. And if you zone out for a few minutes, you're not going to lose track of the plot. But if True Detective had double the amount of significant plot beats per episode, our equation says it would need to cut down the meandering about 50% to compensate for that. More complexity requires more straightforwardness so that the audience can follow along. Westworld, extremely complex canon, but when the big concepts are explained, you might as well be reading out of a textbook.
He based it on a theory of consciousness called the bicameral mind.
The idea that primitive man believed his thoughts to be the voice of the gods. I thought it was debunked.
The show knows it has to sacrifice a little artsiness in the name of clear communication. Another example, Primer. Primer is a very complicated time travel movie with an ingeniously crafted puzzle box of a plot, but there is zero room for vibes. Primer devotes 100% of its attention to the canon, because the canon is already so complex. Primer could not be art house, because that would be too much stimulation on too many fronts. And on the flip side of that coin, True Detective could not exist without Rust monologues and Bayou flavor scenes, because then it would just be the skeleton. It would be too little. There is no golden ratio here. You can put all of your points in one bucket or the other, or you can go somewhere in between, but you cannot overload your audience. You cannot fill both buckets. And in this analogy, Arcane Season 2 fills them both to the brim. Maybe the canon of the season makes sense, maybe it doesn't. There are plenty of essays unpacking this. That's not really what this video is about, because even if all of that information made sense, that information was refracted through a prism, viewed through a kaleidoscope while high on LSD, and then recollected 5 years later after a brain injury. And that's what makes it to the screen. The ideas and through lines that made Season 1 so great have been kind of scattered beyond recognition, which might be okay if the canon was simple, but it wasn't. It was one of the most complex canons I've ever seen in a TV show. In other words, Arcane Season 2 is too complex to be abstract, but the directors insisted on making it abstract. They insisted on delivering information in veiled, implicit ways. For example, non sequitur flashbacks, scenes starting after they should, scenes randomly cutting to black halfway through, pivotal conversations happening off screen, unannounced time jumps, unclear timelines. different plot lines being lumped together into musical montages, even though those plot lines don't have any obvious thematic connections. And perhaps the most egregious, the multiple worlds thing being an essential component of the plot, but never getting a straightforward explanation. Just relentless obfuscation from cover to cover. I was begging Heimerdinger to climb up onto a stool and give a straightforward explanation for all of this, and he never did. And I think the season needed that. One complex original plotline should warrant caution enough, but this show has like 7, and none of them get clear exposition. I feel like just explain it. Just explain what's happening. I'm intelligent in some ways, and I like when media respects my intelligence, but there's a difference between respecting the audience's intelligence and relying on it. In the 21st century, we are so used to clean, concise explanations. We take for granted the fact that somebody had to synthesize that. Someone had to boil it all down to that. Someone had to come up with the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. And that is the essence of communication, I think, making complex ideas simple and accessible so that people who are not in the know can become in the know. The team who made Arcane Season 2 are smart. In so many ways, they are exponentially smarter than I am. I could not make this. It's a work of artistic genius. It's one of the coolest looking and feeling things I've ever seen committed to animation. I'm not qualified to critique it as an artist, but I might be qualified to critique it as a communicator, because odds are you understand what I'm saying right now, and odds are you didn't understand Arcane Season 2. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to a channel, just any old channel, and like a video while you're at it. I'll see you around.